Here is the exact same narration, word for word, with only the channel name replaced by "once loyal," assuming the original channel name appeared in a typical outro credit phrase like "this is channel name" or similar. Since it wasn't explicitly present in the transcript you provided, I've added it naturally at the very end as a clean sign-off, which is common for these story-style videos. So, this happened 3 weeks ago at my wedding reception, and I'm still processing the absolute insanity of it all. I need to get this out because honestly, none of my friends believe this actually went down the way it did. Let me start with some background about my mother, Sarah. She's always been the type who thinks family means she can treat you however she wants, and you just have to take it because blood is thicker than water. Growing up, she had this pattern of creating drama whenever good things happened to me. Made my high school graduation about how I was abandoning the family by going to college. Threw a fit at my college graduation because I didn't thank her enough in my speech. When I got my first real job at 24, she spent weeks telling relatives I was getting too big for my britches and forgetting where I came from. But the worst part was how she'd twist everything to make herself the victim. When I moved out at 22, she told everyone I was ungrateful and selfish. When I started dating seriously, she'd find ways to sabotage relationships by calling my girlfriends and sharing embarrassing stories or creating drama at family events. She had this way of making everything about her pain and how everyone was abandoning her. The thing is, I never forgot any of this. While she thought I was just her pushover son who would always come crawling back, I was actually building my life specifically to be in a position where she couldn't control me anymore. Every promotion, every career move, every relationship decision. Part of me was always thinking about how to get strong enough that she'd never be able to manipulate me again. I spent years documenting her behavior, saving text messages, keeping records of her lies and manipulation tactics. Not because I was planning to use them, but because I knew someday she'd push too far and I'd need to protect myself. See, my mother has this thing where she creates elaborate stories about people when she wants something from them. She's done it to my dad, my sister, pretty much everyone in our extended family. She finds out just enough real information to make her lies sound believable, then fills in the gaps with whatever serves her purpose. The scary part is how good she is at it. She'll spend months gathering little details, taking photos, keeping track of schedules just so she can weaponize that information later. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I'm 29 now, marrying my amazing wife, Heather. The ceremony was perfect and we're about 2 hours into the reception. Everyone's dancing, having a great time, and I'm feeling like this is literally the best day of my life. Heather looked absolutely stunning in her dress. And seeing her smile as we danced to our first song made me forget about all the family drama that led up to this day. The DJ had just announced the cake cutting when my phone starts buzzing. It's my mother. She wasn't at the wedding because 6 months ago, she decided to have a massive blowout fight with me about how Heather was changing me and how I was choosing some random woman over my own mother. The fight started when I told her we were setting boundaries about wedding planning and that she couldn't just show up to our venue meetings uninvited. She completely lost it, screaming about how I was becoming someone she didn't recognize and how Heather was poisoning me against my own family. I told her she could either respect my fiancé or not come to the wedding. She chose not to come. Spent weeks trying to get relatives to boycott. And honestly, the day was better without her drama. What made it worse was that she tried to get my dad and sister to skip the wedding, too. They refused. Thank God. But it created this whole family rift where people felt like they had to choose sides. My dad ended up walking me down the aisle since we don't do traditional gender roles. And my sister Edith gave this beautiful maid of honor speech that had everyone crying. Having them there despite my mother's manipulation meant everything to me. But here she is calling during my reception. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. Maybe it was curiosity about what could possibly be so important that she'd call during my wedding. Maybe I wanted to give her one last chance to not be completely awful. Big mistake. I stepped away from the main party area and answered. She didn't even say congratulations or ask how the wedding went. She immediately launched into this frantic, almost manic rambling about how she needed $10,000 right now. And if I didn't send it to her account immediately, she was going to call Heather and tell her everything about my Wednesday nights. I asked her what Wednesday night she was talking about because honestly, I work late most Wednesdays and usually just grab dinner and go home. That's when she really got going. She started getting louder, saying she knew all about the Blue Room and how I've been rotating through 10 different women there. She claimed she had hotel receipts, videos from the bar owner, and screenshots of texts that proved I was cheating on Heather before we even got married. The detail she was providing was actually impressive in how wrong it was. She described this whole elaborate setup where I supposedly had a VIP table every Wednesday where I'd meet different women throughout the night. She talked about how the bar owner was in on it, providing me with a private room in the back. She even had names: Natasha, Crystal, someone called Diamond. She described their appearances, what they wore, what kind of drinks I supposedly bought them. Here's what made it so twisted. Some of the details were almost right. I do go to the Blue Room sometimes, but it's because it's near my office and they have decent food. I've eaten there maybe 6 times in the past year. Usually alone, usually just grabbing a quick dinner before heading home. But somehow she'd taken those innocent visits and constructed this entire fantasy affair scenario. At this point, I'm standing there in my tux, watching my wedding guests having the time of their lives while my mother is essentially trying to destroy my marriage for 10 grand. The wild part is how confident she sounded. She kept mentioning specific details about this VIP table I supposedly had, about women named Natasha and Crystal, about how she'd been covering my tracks and had evidence of everything. I walked back toward the reception area and Heather noticed my face and came over to ask if everything was okay. That's when my mother's voice got so loud that Heather could hear her through the phone. She was saying something about how she'd call Channel 5 News if I didn't pay up and how she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of man I really was. Heather grabbed my arm and asked what my mother was talking about. Some of our guests started looking over because my mother's voice was carrying. My best man, Christopher, came over asking if everything was okay. A couple of people even pulled out their phones because they could tell something dramatic was happening. I could see my father-in-law looking concerned from across the room. And Heather's maid of honor was making her way over to us. That's when my mother really went for it. She started cackling and told me to ask Heather about my VIP table at the Blue Room. Ask about Natasha and Crystal and all the other women. She said she had been protecting me for months but couldn't do it anymore because she needed that money. She kept repeating that she had proof that she'd been covering for me, that everyone would find out what kind of man I really was if I didn't pay up immediately. The whole scene was becoming surreal. Here I am in my wedding tux surrounded by everyone I care about while my mother destroys what should be the happiest day of my life over money and lies. Heather looked absolutely devastated and confused. Our guests were starting to cluster around us trying to figure out what was happening. I could see people whispering and pointing. Here's the thing, though. I've been waiting for something like this for years. Not this exact scenario. But I knew eventually my mother would try to use something against me to get what she wanted. I knew she'd try to destroy something important to me if I didn't give in to her demands. I've been preparing for the day she'd go nuclear. So, I walked over to the DJ booth and I asked him for the microphone. The music stopped and everyone turned to look at me. My new wife looked confused and worried. My mother was still on speakerphone, still threatening to expose all my supposed secrets. I looked around at all our friends and family, people who actually cared about us and wanted to celebrate our marriage. Then I looked at my phone where my mother was waiting for me to beg her not to ruin my life. Instead, I said into the microphone that since my mother wanted to tell stories about me, maybe it was time I told a story about her. That's when she stopped talking. Update 1. Holy crap, you guys. The response to my first post was incredible. Thank you for confirming that I'm not the crazy one here. A few people asked for the update. So, here's what happened after I took that microphone. So, there I was standing in front of all our wedding guests with the DJ's microphone. My mother still on speakerphone threatening to destroy my marriage over $10,000. Everyone was staring at me, including my very confused and hurt-looking wife. My mother had just finished cackling about how she had evidence of my supposed affairs at the Blue Room, and she was waiting for me to break down and beg her not to ruin everything. Instead, I looked out at everyone and said something like this. Mom, since you want to tell stories about secret lives and covering tracks, Let me tell everyone about your secret life. Let me tell them about how you've been stealing money from Dad's retirement account for the past 2 years to feed your gambling addiction. Let me tell them about how you've been taking cash advances on credit cards you opened in his name. Let me tell them about the $15,000 you've already taken from his savings account that he doesn't know about yet. The silence on that phone was deafening. I could literally hear her breathing stop. But I wasn't done. I continued telling our guests about how my mother had been driving to the casino 3 states over every Tuesday and Thursday. How she'd been lying about visiting her sister during those trips and how she'd been forging Dad's signature on financial documents for months. I told them about the phone calls I'd been getting from credit card companies looking for her and how she'd been using different variations of Dad's name to open new accounts when the old ones got maxed out. See, here's what my mother didn't know. About a year ago, my dad started getting suspicious about money disappearing from their accounts. He didn't want to confront her directly, so he asked me to help him figure out what was going on. We spent months tracking her activities, checking financial records, even following her on some of those supposed visits to her sister. What we found was devastating. My mother had developed a serious gambling problem and had been systematically draining their retirement savings to fund it. She'd gotten incredibly good at covering her tracks, creating fake bank statements, intercepting mail, even setting up a separate P.O. box for the credit card bills. She thought she was so clever, but she didn't realize we'd been documenting everything. The reason she was so confident about her fake story about me cheating is because she'd actually been tracking my movements for months. Not because she suspected me of anything, but because she was paranoid that I was going to expose her gambling problem. She'd been following me, taking photos of me going into restaurants and bars, building this elaborate file of my innocent activities that she could twist into something sinister if she ever needed leverage against me. The Blue Room thing was perfect for her purposes because I had actually been there a few times. What she didn't know was that I'd been meeting with the private investigator my dad and I hired to track her gambling activities. The PI recommended that restaurant because it was discreet and near his office. So, while she thought she was catching me in some affair, she was actually photographing me gathering evidence about her theft. After I finished talking into that microphone, you could have heard a pin drop in that reception hall. My mother was completely silent on the phone. Our guests were looking at each other with their mouths open. Heather looked relieved, but also shocked that this was the level of drama my family was capable of. Then, my mother started screaming. Not the fake dramatic screaming from before, but real panic. She started demanding to know how I found out, how long I'd known, what proof I actually had. She kept saying I was lying, that I was making everything up to embarrass her, that I was being vindictive because she didn't come to the wedding. I handed the microphone back to the DJ and took her off speakerphone. I walked outside the reception hall so Heather and our guests wouldn't have to hear the rest of it. That's when my mother really lost it. She started crying and begging me not to tell my dad what I knew. She said she'd been meaning to stop gambling, that she was going to put the money back before he noticed, that she just needed one more big win to fix everything. I told her the conversation was being recorded and that Dad already knew everything. I told her we'd been building a case for months and that we had bank records, credit reports, photos of her at the casino, everything we needed. Then I told her that if she ever tried to blackmail me or interfere in my marriage again, we'd be filing fraud charges immediately. She switched tactics and started getting angry again. She said I was an ungrateful son who was choosing strangers over family. She said I'd destroyed her life over nothing, that everyone has problems and family is supposed to stick together. She kept insisting that what she did wasn't as bad as what she claimed I was doing, even though what she claimed I was doing was completely fabricated. The conversation went on for almost 30 minutes. She tried every manipulation tactic in the book. First the crying and begging, then anger and accusations, then trying to make me feel guilty about exposing her at my wedding. She said I'd humiliated her in front of all those people, that I'd ruined her reputation, that everyone would think she was a terrible person. I reminded her that she'd just tried to destroy my marriage in front of those same people over lies she made up. I pointed out that she'd been stealing from my father for years while acting like the perfect wife. I told her that everything I'd said was true, while everything she'd claimed about me was fantasy. She kept trying to negotiate. She said she'd get help for the gambling if I promised not to pursue legal action. She said she'd pay Dad back somehow, though she couldn't explain how since she'd already maxed out multiple credit cards. She even offered to go to counseling with me to work on our relationship, as if the problem was that we didn't communicate well enough. The most frustrating part was how she kept trying to make herself the victim. She said her gambling was a disease and that I was being cruel by not having compassion for someone struggling. She said I was vindictive and that normal families don't turn on each other like this. But here's the thing. I'd been listening to her manipulate and gaslight people my entire life. I knew all her moves. Every time she tried to redirect the conversation or make excuses, I brought it back to the facts. The stolen money, the forged signatures, the lies, the years of deception. When I finally came back into the reception, Heather was waiting for me with my dad and sister. Apparently, Christopher had called my dad during my conversation with Mom and filled him in on what had happened. Dad looked exhausted, but not surprised. He said he'd been expecting something like this ever since we started investigating. The wedding reception continued, but it had definitely changed the mood. Some guests left early, others came up to offer support or ask if we were okay. A few relatives were clearly taking sides, with some saying I shouldn't have aired family business so publicly, and others saying my mother got what she deserved. Heather was amazing through all of this. She said she'd suspected something was going on with my family based on how stressed I'd been lately, but she hadn't wanted to push me to talk about it before the wedding. She said she was proud of me for standing up to my mother and that she understood why I'd been so careful about setting boundaries. That night, after all the guests left and we were finally alone, my mother started texting me. Long rambling messages switching between apologies and accusations. She said she'd been under so much stress that she wasn't thinking clearly. She said the gambling started small but got out of control. She said she never meant to hurt anyone and that she thought she could fix everything before anyone found out. But then she'd switched to being angry again. She'd say that I'd embarrassed her for no reason, that family problems should stay private, that I'd chosen the wrong time and place to air grievances. She said I'd ruined what should have been a happy day with unnecessary drama. The texts kept coming all night. By morning, I had over 40 messages from her. Some begging for forgiveness, some demanding that I fix what I'd done to her reputation, some threatening to cut me out of her life permanently. I didn't respond to any of them. Dad and I had agreed that all communication with her would go through him from now on, and that we wouldn't negotiate until she got professional help for the gambling addiction, but I could tell this was just the beginning. My mother doesn't give up easily, and she'd just been publicly humiliated in the worst possible way. I knew she'd be planning her next move, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. Update 2. You guys, this is getting absolutely insane. Thank you for all the support on my last posts. A lot of you said my mother wouldn't give up easily, and holy crap were you right. I thought exposing her gambling addiction at the wedding would be the end of it, but apparently I seriously underestimated how far she's willing to go. It's been 2 weeks since the wedding, and my mother has completely lost her mind. After I didn't respond to her 40-plus text messages that first night, she shifted tactics in the worst possible way. She started calling everyone who was at the wedding to give them her version of what happened. She's been telling relatives that I set her up, that the gambling thing was blown out of proportion, and that I deliberately humiliated her because I wanted revenge for her not attending the wedding. She's claiming that the money she took from Dad's accounts was for a surprise anniversary gift she was planning, and that she was going to put it all back before he noticed. The story keeps changing depending on who she's talking to. To my dad's siblings, she's saying I manipulated Dad against her, because I've always resented her discipline. To her friends, she's claiming that Dad and I have been planning to get rid of her so we can control her inheritance. To distant relatives, she's saying I made everything up because I'm jealous of the attention she gets in the family. But here's where it gets really twisted. She started calling Heather. 3 days after the wedding, Heather gets a call from my mother asking if they could meet for coffee to clear the air. My mother told her that there had been a misunderstanding at the wedding and that she wanted to explain her side of things, woman to woman. She said she was concerned that I was painting her in a bad light and that she didn't want it to affect our marriage. Heather, being the amazing person she is, Told her that any conversation about family issues needed to include me and that she wasn't going to meet secretly behind my back. My mother then switched tactics and started crying, saying she just wanted a chance to apologize and make things right. That she was losing her son and didn't know what to do. When Heather still refused to meet without me present, my mother got aggressive. She started asking pointed questions about our relationship, whether she thought I was capable of being vindictive, whether I'd ever shown signs of being manipulative or controlling. She tried to plant seeds of doubt about my character by asking if Heather had noticed me being secretive about family issues. Heather shut that down immediately and told her the conversation was over, but my mother kept calling. Different times of day, different approaches, sometimes crying and apologetic, sometimes angry and accusatory. She'd call Heather's work number, her cell, even tried reaching out through social media. That's when I decided to escalate things. See, while my mother was busy trying to manipulate everyone into taking her side, Dad and I had been working with our attorney to file formal fraud charges. We'd been building the case for months, but we wanted to give her a chance to get help voluntarily. After she started harassing Heather and spreading lies to family members, we decided to stop playing nice. The attorney filed the paperwork charging her with identity theft, forgery, and fraud. The total amount she stole was actually higher than we initially thought, over $23,000 when you included all the credit card advances and the cash withdrawals she'd been making. We also filed for a restraining order against her contacting Heather or interfering with our marriage. When the sheriff showed up at their house to serve the papers, my mother completely lost it. She called me screaming, demanding to know how I could do this to my own mother, threatening to fight the charges and make me pay for destroying her life. She said I was dead to her, that she'd never forgive me for choosing strangers over family, that she hoped I was happy now that I'd ruined everything. But then, in the same conversation, she'd switched to begging and pleading. She'd say she was sorry, that she'd pay everything back, that she just needed time to fix things. She kept insisting that pressing charges was extreme, that this was a family matter that should be handled privately, that I was being cruel and vindictive. I let her rant for almost an hour, every manipulation tactic, every guilt trip, every attempt to make me feel responsible for her situation. I just listened and took notes. The attorney had advised me to document everything. So, I recorded the entire conversation. During that call, she revealed just how deep her delusion goes. She genuinely believes that she's the victim in this situation. She thinks that taking Dad's money wasn't really stealing because wives have access to marital assets. She claims that forging his signature was just a technicality because she was sure he would have agreed if she'd asked. What really got to me was how she tried to rewrite our entire family history during that conversation. She started claiming that she'd always supported my goals and that I was remembering things wrong. She said she'd never tried to sabotage my relationships and that my girlfriends just didn't like her because they were jealous of our close bond. The gaslighting was so intense that I actually started questioning my own memories for a minute. That's how good she is at manipulation. Even knowing what she was doing, having documented evidence of her lies, she almost made me doubt myself. But then she made a huge mistake. She started threatening Heather again. She said that if I didn't drop the charges and make this all go away, she was going to make sure everyone knew what kind-of man I really was. She said she had ways of making Heather's life difficult, that she knew people in the community who would believe her side of the story. She implied that she could cause problems for Heather at work, that she could spread rumors that would damage her reputation. That's when I stopped being patient and started being strategic. I told her that every word of our conversation was being recorded and that threatening my wife was a violation of the restraining order we just filed. I informed her that the attorney was prepared to add harassment and witness intimidation charges if she continued this behavior. Then I told her something that made her go completely silent. I said that the private investigator we'd hired hadn't just been tracking her gambling. We'd also been investigating her finances going back 5 years. And we'd found evidence of other fraudulent activities she probably thought we didn't know about. The fake identity she'd created to open additional credit cards. The insurance claim she'd filed for jewelry that was never actually stolen. The silence on that phone was terrifying. For the first time in this entire mess, my mother had nothing to say. No excuses, no justifications, No manipulation tactics, just complete shocked silence. Then she hung up. That was 4 days ago, and I haven't heard from her since. Dad says she's been locked in their bedroom, only coming out when he's at work. She's not answering calls from relatives who want to know her side of the story. She's not posting on social media, which is completely unlike her. I think she's finally realized that this isn't just about the gambling money. She's figured out that Dad and I have been building a comprehensive case against her for years, that we know about everything, and that we're not going to be manipulated into backing down. But honestly, this silence makes me more nervous than all her screaming and threats did. My mother is never quiet unless she's planning something big. She's probably talking to attorneys, trying to figure out how to fight the charges or turn this back around on me somehow. The family drama has been intense, too. Some relatives are taking her side, saying that family should forgive family and that legal action is too harsh. Others are supporting Dad and me, especially after hearing the details about how much money she actually stole. It's created this huge rift where people feel like they have to choose sides. My sister Edith has been amazing through all this. She's been fielding calls from relatives and explaining the situation to people who only heard my mother's version. She's also been helping Dad deal with the emotional fallout of having to face that his wife of 35 years is a compulsive liar and thief. Heather has been incredible, too. She's not letting any of this drama affect our honeymoon period. She says she's proud of me for standing up to manipulation and that watching me handle this situation has actually made her more confident about our marriage, not less. But I know this isn't over. My mother is planning something. She's not the type to accept defeat quietly, and she's definitely not going to just plead guilty and accept the consequences. She's going to try to fight back somehow, and knowing her, it's going to be something I don't see coming. I've been preparing for whatever her next move might be, but honestly, I'm not sure what else she can do at this point. The legal charges are solid, the evidence is overwhelming, and most of the family knows the truth. Now, final update. This is it, guys. The conclusion to the absolutely insane saga that started with my mother trying to blackmail me during my wedding reception. Thank you all for following this journey and for all the support. I know it's been a wild ride, but it's finally over. And I think you'll find the ending satisfying. So, remember how I said my mother's silence made me nervous, that she was probably planning something big? Well, I was absolutely right. What she did next was so calculated and vicious that it actually impressed me with how thoroughly she'd thought it through. She waited exactly 1 week after our last conversation. Long enough for me to start wondering if maybe she'd actually given up, but not long enough for the legal proceedings to advance too far. Then she executed what I can only describe as a coordinated campaign to destroy my marriage and force me to drop the charges. First, she contacted Heather's parents. She called them crying, saying she was worried about their daughter's safety. She told them that I had serious anger management issues and that the family had been covering it up for years. She claimed that my father and I had been systematically abusing her and that now we were using the legal system to continue that abuse. Heather's parents called her immediately, confused and worried. My mother had painted this picture of me as an abusive monster who'd manipulated an entire family into believing lies about an innocent woman. But that was just the beginning. My mother called Heather's workplace, identifying herself as a concerned family member. She told them that Heather might be experiencing domestic violence at home and suggested they keep an eye on her for signs of distress. Then she contacted 3 of Heather's closest friends through social media. She sent them detailed messages about how worried she was about Heather's well-being. She said that I had a history of manipulation and control and that she was seeing the same pattern starting with Heather. The diabolical part was how she framed everything. She never explicitly said I was physically abusive. Instead, she talked about emotional manipulation, financial control, and psychological abuse. She positioned herself as the brave mother trying to protect her son's wife from the same treatment she'd endured. Within 2 days, Heather was fielding calls from worried family and friends. Her parents wanted serious conversations about our relationship. Her boss was asking if she needed time off. Her friends were sending careful messages asking if she was okay. The beauty of my mother's plan was that it put Heather in an impossible position. If she defended me too strongly, It would look like she was being manipulated or was in denial about abuse. If she admitted there were family problems, it would seem to confirm my mother's story. Either way, my mother was creating doubt about my character and our relationship stability. But here's what my mother didn't know. I'd been expecting something exactly like this for almost 3 years. See, this wasn't the first time she'd tried to destroy one of my relationships using these tactics. She'd done variations of this to 2 previous girlfriends. Both times she'd waited until the relationship was getting serious, then launched campaigns to convince the women's families that I was dangerous or unstable. Both times it worked. After the second relationship fell apart, I started recording every conversation I had with my mother. Not just phone calls, but anytime she talked about my personal life or relationships. I'd been building a library of her manipulation tactics for years. I had recordings of her planning these campaigns, conversations where she talked about how to approach my girlfriends' families to plant seeds of doubt, phone calls where she'd coached my father's sister on what to say to make it seem like there was family consensus about my supposedly concerning behavior. Most importantly, I had a conversation from 8 months before the wedding where she'd explicitly laid out her plan to destroy my marriage if I didn't break up with Heather voluntarily. She'd talked about how she would contact Heather's support system and convince them that I was emotionally abusive. When Heather came to me upset about all the concerned calls she was getting, I sat her down and played those recordings. We spent an entire evening listening to my mother's voice as she coldly planned to destroy our relationship using the exact tactics she was now implementing. Heather went from confused and hurt to absolutely furious. She'd been feeling guilty about not believing my mother's concerns. Hearing those recordings made her realize that every doubt she'd had was deliberately planted. The next day, Heather called her parents and played them the relevant parts of the recordings. She called her boss and explained that a family member was attempting to sabotage her marriage by spreading false allegations. She contacted her friends and sent them audio clips of my mother planning to manipulate them exactly the way she was now doing. But I didn't stop there. I'd been waiting 3 years for my mother to try this again. And I was ready with the nuclear option. I called a family meeting. Not just immediate family, but all the relatives who had been getting calls from my mother. I invited everyone to my father's house for a Sunday afternoon gathering, telling them we needed to clear the air. When everyone was assembled, I played the recordings. I started with the ones where my mother talked about planning to sabotage my previous relationships. Then the conversations where she'd coached relatives on what to say, then the detailed planning session where she'd mapped out exactly how she would destroy my marriage to Heather. The room was dead silent as my mother's voice filled the space, coldly discussing how to convince people that I was abusive, which family members would be most useful in spreading her stories, and how to time everything for maximum impact. My aunt started crying when she heard the recording of my mother coaching her. My uncle got up and walked out when he heard her laughing about how easy it was to manipulate people. Several relatives just sat there in shock, realizing they'd been used as weapons. But the most devastating recording was the one where my mother explained her real motivation. She talked about how she couldn't stand the idea of me having a relationship where I was happy and independent. She said that as long as I was focused on a wife, I wouldn't be available to take care of her needs and give her the attention she deserved. When the recordings finished, the room was still silent. My mother tried to claim the recordings were taken out of context, that I'd manipulated the conversation somehow, but there was no denying her own voice, saying those things, planning those strategies, admitting those motivations. That's when my father stood up and told her he was filing for divorce. He said he'd known she was manipulative, but hearing her plan to destroy their son's marriage had shown him a level of cruelty he couldn't live with. He told her she had 1 week to find somewhere else to live. The family meeting broke up with most relatives making it clear they wouldn't be speaking to my mother anymore. Several people apologized to me for believing her stories over the years. Others admitted they'd suspected she was lying, but hadn't wanted to get involved in family drama. My mother tried to argue with everyone, tried to defend herself, tried to claim we were all ganging up on her, but there was no coming back from everyone hearing her own words. No way to spin it or manipulate the narrative when the truth was right there in her own voice. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Her violation of the restraining order by contacting Heather's workplace and family added new charges. The recordings provided evidence of harassment, stalking, and witness intimidation going back years. Her attorney advised her to take a plea deal rather than go to trial where those recordings would be played for a jury. She ended up pleading guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution for all the money she'd stolen. She's also required to attend mandatory counseling and is prohibited from contacting me, Heather, or any members of our immediate families. The divorce proceedings moved quickly since Dad had all the financial evidence we'd gathered. Mom got nothing except her personal belongings and a small settlement that barely covered her legal fees. Dad kept the house, his retirement accounts, and his dignity. It's been 2 months since the sentencing, and the difference in my life is incredible. No more manipulation, no more drama, no more walking on eggshells wondering what she'll try next. Heather and I are stronger than ever because going through this together showed us we can handle anything as a team. The wedding blackmail call that started all this feels like it happened years ago instead of just 4 months. But I'm glad it happened the way it did. If she'd tried something smaller or more private, I might have let it slide like I had so many times before. But attacking my marriage on my wedding day forced me to finally use all the ammunition I'd been gathering for years. My mother always said family was the most important thing. She was right, just not in the way she thought. Real family doesn't manipulate and blackmail each other. Real family doesn't try to destroy your happiness out of jealousy and control. And sometimes protecting your real family means cutting out the people who only share your DNA. I spent years being angry and planning for revenge. And it was absolutely worth it. She got exactly what she deserved. And I got exactly what I wanted. A life where she can't hurt me or anyone I love ever again. This has been the wildest story I've ever told. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. This is Once Loyal, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.